with our four panelists and our wonderful speaker. I will introduce the panelists all at once. I'm sure you'll recognize them, and it won't be difficult. Carolyn Glick is a deputy managing editor of the Jerusalem Post. She's sitting right there, first on the side. She's also the Senior Fellow for Middle East Affairs of the Washington, D.C.-based Center for Security Policy. Ms. Glick is the author of Shackled Warrior, Israel and the Global Jihad, which I recommend to all of you very fervently. Published by Geffen Publishers here in Israel. Carolyn made Aliyah to Israel in 1991 after receiving her BA in Political Science from Columbia University. She was glad to get out of things. I know, I went there once for a year. She joined the Israel Defense Forces that summer and served as an officer for 5.5 years. From 1994 to 96 as an IDF captain, she coordinated negotiations with the PLO. In this capacity, she was core member of Israel's negotiating team with the Palestinians. I don't envy her that. In 1997 to 98, she was Assistant Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. During Operation Iraqi Freedom, she covered the U.S.-led war in Iraq as an embedded journalist with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry. Reporting for the Post, Ma'ariv, Israel TV's Channel 2, and the Chicago Sun-Times, Carolyn was one of the only female journalists on the front lines with the U.S. forces and the first Israeli journalist reporting from free Baghdad. Sitting next to Caroline is Ruthie Bloom, who you may recognize from pictures of her many articles, an accomplished journalist, commentator, analyst, and author. In 2012, she wrote an incisive book, To Hell in a Handbasket, Carter, Obama, and the Arab Spring, quote unquote, where she documents the intimate details of the 1979 kidnapping of the American embassy by Iran in the Carter administration, wherein she portrays the Carter administration's negotiations with Iran and shows how the lessons of that debacle could have been instructive for President Obama's policies with Iran, if only he paid attention. Next to Ruthie is Jay Shapiro. Jay, after moving to Israel from Philadelphia in '69, Jay worked at the Israel aircraft industries in various engineering and management positions. He was part of the team that negotiated the contracts for the Lviv program. He also served as a Shaliach Aliyah and representative of the Aliyah Department of the Jewish Agency in North America for several years, and Jay regularly appears as a talk show host for Israel National Radio. And then, next to Jay, is my good old friend, Israel Madad. I should say Israel, or Wimpy, if you want. Made Aliyah in 1970 with his wife Batya, who's sitting here with him. He was a parliamentary assistant in the Knesset for 20 years. Israel is an accomplished writer and analyst. He and Professor Eli Pollack co-founded the Israel Media Watch, which appears regularly in the Jerusalem Post. And also with Eli, he co-authors the Jerusalem Post column Media Matters. Mr. Madad is currently also a key researcher for the Begin Heritage Center. So with that, we shall have a panel discussion.
First of all, it's really an honor to be here honoring the memory of Manny. It just shows how many people there are who are just so special among the Jewish people, and how anybody that you get to know even superficially can really just amaze you in what they're willing to do and in their dedication to our people. And it really, I think, knowing how many incredible Jews there are, it's just a source of undying inspiration for me, because I just feel so privileged to be a member of our people. So really, it's a pleasure to be here. And I've been called a passionate speaker, but I got to tell you, I'm just so moved by listening to Professor Aaron's we made a lot of mistakes in our history as Jews. Listening to you, and listening to Daniel before you talking about the immortal words of Kohelet and Chadash Tachat Hashemesh, that really, you go back, and the spies who came and said, they're giants, they're fearful and fearsome, we can't go there, we should go back to Egypt. And at that point we had a great leader who said, now you can go back to Egypt, we're going forward, right? And he listened to the two people who weren't cowards. But it's true that we continuously have the same issues that we're dealing with all of the time, of cowardice, of betrayal, of self-interest, fighting and undoing the interest at large of our people. We've had it not only in the last 65 years, we've had it throughout our existence as a people, really, since Yetziat Mitzrayim, and even before that. And I didn't have a lot of prepared remarks for this evening, so I do have two children at home that I promised I'd put in bed. So I just wanted to share two stories and one thought that I think align with what we heard from Professor Ahrens and also what we heard from Daniel, which are, I was at the Jerusalem Post Conference in New York a couple of weeks ago, and Ambassador Oren, who has not filled your shoes in the embassy in Washington, much to my dismay, he came on and did his usual thing, talking about what extraordinary cooperation we have with the Obama administration in all areas, and how the Americans were going to maintain our qualitative edge with the Arabs at the same time that Hagel had already walked back his supposed pledge to give us 1 million of these missiles and 100 billion of those missiles and a gazillion of those things, and saying, no, actually, we didn't mean that. We were just sort of talking among friends, over drinks, and I said maybe we would think about it. And I couldn't help feeling that this was just deeply disturbing and pathetic. Because, as Professor Aaron said, we at 65 should not be worrying about whether somebody else is going to preserve our ability to defend ourselves. It's really up to us, and we can't be schnorring for our military procurements. And actually, our dependence on aid from the United States to our military, I think, is really like a welfare mentality. We act like we can't do without when we have GDP growth per year of 3.5%, 4%, when the Americans have 1% growth and the Europeans have negative growth. I mean, what are we whining about? We should be able to finance our own defense at this point, and this breeding of this welfare mentality among the leadership of our military establishment has been extremely debilitating to our strategic understanding of events. So we're constantly taking into consideration what other people are telling us we should be thinking about instead of what we're most concerned about or have to be most concerned about. And we shouldn't be making allowance for other people's idiocies because we're receiving from them military assistance that from an economic perspective we would be better off doing without. So that's one thing that I wanted to say. And another thing was, I think what we're the other thing was from the United States, which is all this IRS persecution of the Tea Party movement and the incredible audits and the delays in giving nonprofit status to non-liberal organizations by the IRS during 2 election cycles, before the 2010 elections and then up to and past the 2012 presidential election. And I think that the thing that's so interesting to me about the Tea Party movement, and that we see changing here as well, is that it's actually just like the original Tea Party movement in Boston Harbor in the 18th century was. This is a revolutionary movement in the United States, which is why it's considered to be so dangerous. Because the Tea Party, in essence, both the founding fathers of the United States and the people who are being persecuted by Obama's IRS today, are elites. And a revolution, you hear a lot about revolutions being violent, but the truth of the matter is that revolutions, as I think John Adams said, begin in the hearts and minds of men. And the whole notion of a revolutionary change in a society is having one group of elites replacing another group of elites. And when people say that your icons are not interesting to us and we don't care about them, and we have icons of our own, these are the people who are truly dangerous to a society or to an elite power structure in any society. And I think that in Israel today, there are things going on the level of our youth and our young people, up to, including somebody like me, who I consider to be still young or maybe middle-aged, but that we are willing to move forward without the permission of the powers that be. You see it in all of these different organizations that have come up in the last 20 years, from the Mechinot, the Ketan Tzvayot, the pre-military leadership academies throughout the country, and the extraordinary young people that they're producing on an annual basis. You see it in the increased interest in Jewish studies among people who are in their teens and 20s and 30s that was just not available when I met Eliane in 1991. And people, it didn't exist. You see it in everything from the development of Israeli fashion to entertainment like My Lakma internet satire. And without changing in any way our message, we're in advanced stages of negotiations to become a primetime show on Channel 1. Things are happening. Things are happening in this Jewish world, and they're happening in Israel. And I'm not sure how easy it would be to torpedo a levy today. And I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't be possible to do it in 10 years if everything keeps going and people keep standing up. And I'll just finish with the last thought on that, which is that last week I had this interchange with the spokesman of an NGO called the Abraham Fund, because I figured them in the column that I wrote 2 weeks ago as one of the NGOs that's involved in trying to prevent Israel from bringing Arab Israelis into national service and IDF service. And he tried to argue with me that they hadn't done what I said they did, which was petition the Supreme Court to prevent benefits being given to IDF veteran and reservists. And so at a certain point in our conversation, which I have to admit deteriorated into a shouting match, mainly because I lost my patience with him, but he said to me, you have to understand, the Arab Israelis will never be Zionists. And he said it in a very intimidating way, and we've heard this a million times, Arabs can never be Zionists. And I said, yes, they can. Of course they can. What you're saying is a political statement. It's not a statement of truth. You say it, it's a slogan, and you think that I'm supposed to believe it because it slides off your tongue. But if you actually read what I wrote in my column, I was talking about Arab Israelis who are patriotic Israeli citizens who serve in the IDF and who want to serve in the IDF. And you're telling me that there are no Israeli Zionists? Of course there are. Well, you have to define Zionism. I said, no, you're redefining Zionism. Now, what happened in this exchange? How often on a daily basis are we given these slogans? Arabs will never be Zionists. We all have to, you're against peace, as Daniel said, whatever it happens to be, and we're immediately intimidated to say, maybe they're right. They say things with such certainty, they must know what they're talking about. And yet, I think to move forward and to prevent the kind of things that we saw with this levy that was really so debilitating, and we still are feeling its after effects in so many different places in our lives in this country, I think that to get past that, to move forward, and to get to the point where, yes, we will build the levy, we all have to be willing to simply stand up to these lies that have become accepted truths because they've been spoon-fed to us by our elites for so many decades. And if we don't agree with them, then we must be crazy. But in fact, also as Daniel said, these are pathologies. They're not true statements. And the only way to get past them and to have a real debate about who we are as Israelis and as Jews and where we're supposed to be going as a society, as an independent state, is to stop being intimidated by these people. simply stop and not care what they say, and not only that, but also to develop our own alternatives. You start with the defiance, but you move on to the creation. We're already creating and defying in so many different spheres in this country, including in the IDF. And that is the real revolution. It's the revolution in our hearts and in our minds when we recognize that we do have the gift of independence, and it's time that we take it first step, see where it can take us. Thank you very much.